So thank you, Neil, and thank you, Henry, for joining us this morning. I'm Alex MacLaren. I'm the Communications Officer for dotBuiltEnvironment. And in that role, I thought it would be really helpful if we were able to ask you some direct questions about the Global BIM Study report that you guys have produced for the Scottish Futures Trust. So I don't know if you want to say a small bit about yourselves. Henry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Henry Fenby-Taylor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of dotBuiltEnvironment and BIM Implementation Manager at WIG. I was the lead author on this for my sins, and yeah, that's why I'm here, because I wrote most of it.
Super. And Neil, a quick introduction, not that you need any introduction.
Hello, so I'm Neil Thompson. I'm the Chief Exec of dotBuiltEnvironment and co-author on the project. I looked at the economics side of it, so I'm here to answer your economics questions.
Superb, thank you very much.
I'm really glad he is answering those questions, because I know literally the square root of nothing on economics.
Super, and this is why you make such a great team together. Could I ask you perhaps, Henry, to give us a general overview of the report? What is it that you're generally looking at, and in essence, what was the purpose of the report, and what are the conclusions that come out at the end?
Sure. Okay, so we started off, we were asked by the Scottish Futures Trust BIM group, led by David Philp, to have a look at international BIM implementation and how those policies around the world worked. So that was what we began doing, and we looked at other research in the area, and we quickly realised that there was actually much more to the piece than just BIM in isolation. So you had to deal with the governance and the economic, as well as the BIM factors. Looking at BIM in isolation didn't really seem to make much sense. I really felt that you needed to have a look at the greater picture. So that is why it moved in that direction, and we also thought, given the UK's BIM Level 2 policy, and given Digital Built Britain and how BIM policy is very much kind of like the foundation, we then grew that into looking at how the BIM policy can develop into a digital innovation policy.
Super.
And that's how we wrote the report.
The report then summarises with some recommendations for the Scottish Futures Trust. Neil, I don't know if you want to say a small amount about the recommendations that you made, or the character of those recommendations.
So the recommendations came in two flavours. There's a sort of BIM policy specific ones that looks at implementing building information modelling at a policy level, and then with the expansion of how that works in a digital economy, we've given some digital policy goals. So it's, first off, is sort of integration with the construction supply chain and how you communicate with people, and effectively doing that in the BIM world. But then on the other side is looking at larger initiatives like the circular economy and Industry 4.0, and how these things interact with each other at a macro level in the economy. So this is not just an insular, construction procurement from a government. It's more tying other markets together to make the procurement of them more efficient and more effective, better value for money for taxpayers and things like that.
Super, thank you. Do either of you know where this report is going next? Provides very interesting reading. Are the Scottish Futures Trust taking forward any recommendations, or is this providing advice, if you like, to committees that are now going on to discuss these issues?
I'll take that one, as the camera is suddenly pointed to me. Well, this is very much a guidance document for how they need to decide their policy going forward. It's also been kept broad enough so that other governments and other kind of supra and super states can take these policies and take these recommendations and move them forward. Don't know if you've got any thoughts on this one, Neil?
Yeah, not that I want to put the words into the leadership of the Scottish Government, but looking at the economic landscape of recent happenings, the EU referendum, for example, it's meaning people start to have to think about what is your plan going forward as a more independent state. And having an aspiration to be a leader in the digital space is something that I know is on their radar, and I hope that the report gave them a good footing to say, actually, this is a good idea for us to take a leadership position, not just in the UK, not just in Europe, but globally.
Super, thank you. It is a great report. It's available freely online, and we'll pop a link up alongside this video so people can get hold of it. You've got about 30 pages there. It's also extremely well illustrated, and it's great to see the kind of diagrams that you've put together. Some of those diagrams have involved you making some conclusions and some generalizations about various factors, and particularly I'm thinking here about the ease of integration index, which I believe was a kind of co-authored piece from the two of you when trying to look at the countries you were looking at.
Yeah, that went through a lot of iterations, didn't it, Neil? I think we probably had about in the region of 10 to 15 different EOIIs and different variables, and went in it. It went really wide, it came really tight, then we widened it again. So we've been all over the place trying to make that fit.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I'm sure.
I think the important thing to highlight to people is something that may be a misconception is that there is a ranking of performance, but it's not. It's an ease of integration index. So is it for you to implement policy? So, you know, the UK didn't come first, but that doesn't mean it's a poor performer. It just means that it's more difficult to implement policy. But with the level of skill that the UK has, it's been very successful in implementing the policy. So as a performer, it's very good. So I just wanted to make that distinction before.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think the reason it comes out as it does, you know, it's based on statistics that we've gathered and statistics that we've used, and so we can only rely on the information that we've got. So in a certain sense, you know, our outputs are as in our mind are just, you know, they are a statistical variable, so they are, you know, a useful indicator, but they are not, you know, we're not handing out medals and champagne to number one, basically, even though that is, you know, something that I'm sure that they all want.
So you have, particularly looking now at the ease of integration index, this is illustrated diagrammatically in the report using a triangle looking between policy, governance, and economic factors. And I just want to ask you a few questions kind of around that to help people understand how you came to those conclusions. The first, I guess, quite a simple question really is why did you choose those 12 countries? We have the United States, Brazil, Scotland, of course, who the report is made for, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Norway, Qatar, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australia. So really, truly a global study that's covering an awful lot of the map. Was there a decision that 12 was the right number? Was there a decision that these were particularly sort of 12 leaders in BIM? What was it that made you make the decision to look at these 12?
Well, we started on 10. So, yeah, it grew a bit.
Do you want me to take that one?
I think we can share it. Have a go.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So with the I guess there's the two factors of selection. The first one is purely resources. There was not many resources to go around the whole world and check all their policies. So there's that. So we had to limit them to a number. And once we limit them to a number, it's a case of which countries do we pick to fill that 12. And we looked at sort of flavours of government. So we're looking at centralised government, federated government. So centralised being like the UK, so the Westminster controls most pieces. We've got federal, so things like America and Australia. And then looking at sort of the extremes in the economic and policy-based statistics. So, you know,
yes,
do they have large populations, do they have small populations, high income per capita, low income per capita, and sort of balancing across those so we can get a true picture of, because we're more interested in the flavours of government and policy, not the countries themselves, if that makes sense. I don't know if you can elaborate on that, Henry.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're right. We tried to get a nice variety in the kind of BIM styles, as it were, and the government styles. So you have countries like Qatar and Brazil on kind of one hand, and you have small, very small states like Norway and city states like Hong Kong and Singapore on the other. So you are getting that. It is about their BIM policies, and it was very interesting, finding out about those. But it was also about how that fits in to their mode of government. From my perspective, because I'm the governance geek. I love all the government stuff. Neil's the economics guy. I'm the governance guy. So I think that was the really interesting balancing how, their different economic performance against how they manage their affairs worked together with their BIM policy to create this ease of integration index, so that what we didn't want everyone to just be the same and have the same output and the same kind of standards. So that's why we chose a nice variety, so that people could see that it's implementing BIM is bigger than the BIMers. It's bigger than the construction sector. It is something that impacts all of society, infrastructure, horizontal, vertical, all that sort of stuff, impacts everyone, and how governments approach spending money on that, how they approach managing that, why they do it, where they do it, all that sort of stuff, that massively impacts the need for and kind of the scope of the BIM policy. So you have very wide scopes like the UK, which is the widest scope of a BIM policy that you'll find anywhere. BIM level 2 covers, security, the entire project life cycle, to very tight scopes like Singapore, who it's 4 buildings, and it's going to be 4 buildings of this size, and then this size, and then this size. So that is, they have a very tight scope. So it's very interesting to see how the different conditions of different countries produces different BIM policies and gets implemented differently. So that's what we wanted, was that variety and kind of trying to find unique implementations. Super.
I think that comes through very strongly in the report, and in fact it's one of its strengths is that there is no one size fits all for this. There are so many variables, and that any BIM policy and implementation of BIM policy is part, as you say, of a much larger picture. But it's really interesting for you to just pull out a couple of the examples there, and that gives us a flavour of the massive editing job that you guys had to do to pull all of the information that you found down into a 30-page illustrated document. So I hope that we'll come back to some more kind of specific questions about specific countries, some of which I have here. However, you've just told me that one of you is the governance geek and the other one is the economics geek, and I do have some questions that people have raised relating specifically to those. So if I start off looking at the economics questions, if I may, Neil. First of all, possibly a very easy one for you. In the page of diagrams that we look at in this report, you take a very specific measure of GDP. It's noted here as a GDP/C PPP. We've spoken about this before, but I wonder if you could explain what that particular measure of GDP is and why you've chosen to use it in analysing these countries.
Sure. So to give a brief definition of what GDP/C PPP means. So we've got GDP, gross domestic product, which is a measure of productivity in the economy. We divide that by the capita, so that's the population, so that's GDP per capita. So PPP is purchasing power parity. It's a very long, it's a very long acronym, but it's a very good measure. So what it does, it normalizes the spending power of people in that country compared to their productivity. So, for example, so the currency of that is in dollars, but it's not real dollars. It's spending power parity dollars, which is it normalizes for local variations in spending power. So obviously, £20 in London will buy you a sandwich, a coffee, and a packet of crisps, but £20 up in Doncaster may buy you a bit more. That's far too much of a local example.
You might have gone a little too far there.
Yeah, So the spending power parity between London and Thailand, for example. Obviously, people go on holiday and they would say, "Oh wow, I can buy things really cheaply," and it normalizes. It normalizes for that, so you can make a comparison. So what we wanted to compare is, there's no point, because you can have a rich country, but everything's really expensive. So if you think of somewhere, where Henry's going in a couple of days, Tokyo, for example, wealthy country, but everything is very expensive.
Don't tell me that.
Etc. So it normalizes for those variations in geographies.
Super, that's really helpful, thank you. And I guess that normalising across all of these different variables that you guys have begun to discuss must have been one of the big challenges that you faced. Another economic measure that you particularly refer to here is the gross fixed capital formation, GFCF, and that's a measure from the World Bank, I believe. So I can see again why you're kind of bringing that in as a kind of normalising effect. However, you use this as a means to look at particularly kind of construction spend, and I wonder if you could look at why you're using, or could you explain to us why you're using that particular measure as an indication of construction economy?
So we're looking at macroeconomic indices, and gross fixed capital formation is the only measure that contains construction information. So, brief definition, it is the net investment in extending the capital stock. So that means in a year, how much have we expanded our fixed assets? So fixed assets are factories, they are shopping malls, etc. So it encompasses more than construction because it captures things like manufacturing, but within it is a good measure of how much that economy is expanding in terms of its capability in assets.
That makes a lot of...
It excludes depreciation as well, so the yearly measures are snapshots in time, so you can see where investment is being placed and sort of engines of growth for an economy.
Would it be right to say that it's a good indicator for the reasons you've given, but one of the reasons for using it would have been again about resources and the time available? You needed to find something that you could find normalised for each of these countries that would give us an indicator.
Absolutely, you can get data on what that is. Getting country-level construction data is very, very difficult. In the UK, we're quite good at our statistics. With the ONS, a world leader in delivering that level of granularity in statistics, but across the world that doesn't exist. For those that look at their people that run businesses and look at their balance sheets, it doesn't specifically ask you things about what you've built and work that you've commissioned that is inside the construction industry. It's just not part of our accounting framework. It'd be nice if it is, but it just isn't. So in terms of comparing things internationally, the highest level economic indicator that we can use is gross fixed capital formation.
Super. That's really helpful, thank you. If I could move on to a couple of questions about the governance part of this EOII triangle that we're looking at, policy, economics and governance factors. And Henry, you might want to jump into these given your enthusiasm for all things governance. You particularly look at four measures in the diagrams that we use: government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, and control of corruption. And I wonder, Henry, if you're able to talk to us about how you started looking at those measures and made the kind of conclusions that you did, which are shown in the bar graphs in the report.
Okay, so the reason I looked at those measures specifically, there are a number of other World Bank statistics that are available. It was because for me it encompasses the journey that BIM as a policy needs to go through. So it needs to become a policy and it needs to become a law. So the government that is implementing it needs to demonstrate to its people and the international arena that it is capable of doing what it sets out to do. So that's why government effectiveness is in there, and the policy quality. That's really important because BIM and digital innovation is it's a big thing. You've got to bring on a lot of stakeholders. You've got to you've got to bring the built environment sector with you, but you've also got to bring in all of the clients that you're going to require to have this and make the case to them. You're also going to have to scope that policy. So there's lots of work that goes into policy creation and in terms of consultation, development, and refinement and that sort of thing. So it really needed to it's really in there to demonstrate that without a high quality policy mechanism, then you're not going to get something that is then effective. Rule of law and control of corruption I see as kind of two sides of the same coin in this. I think control of corruption insofar as that penetrates everything from government effectiveness to the policy creation and the rule of law. So if a policy is created that specifically favours certain areas, certain parts of a sector, certain companies, which has been known, there are standards in the international arena that are specifically written by a special interest group for that special interest group, and that can if that penetrates into policy, then that's really going to be bad news for everyone who isn't the person who wrote that standard or their key stakeholders. So the rule of law then underpins that. We create good policy, having an open and kind of encompassing policy creation process that isn't corrupt, and then that policy is enforced. So the requirements are set. They are given to everyone. They are told this is how you're going to do it. Now, I can't be more specific than that because the way that Singapore implements, the way that the UK implements, the way that all the other countries around the world implement is very different. But they will all at some point have to tell someone that this is what you have to do, and you have to do this. This is the policy. This is what you're going to do. And the consequences need to be there to enforce that. I mean, some governments use carrots, some use sticks, but you need to be sure that the policy that's being implemented is something that everyone can rely upon. So those metrics were there to give that wider scope, as very much the economics does, to the country that the BIM policy is going into and how effective it can be.
When you were looking at perhaps these 4 criteria in particular, did you look at any particular weighting for them? Do you find that one or other of these is more important than another piece of the policy puzzle?
They come pre-weighted from the World Bank, so they needed kind of increasing in significance because the numbers were quite tiny, and I think we found that, and I think Neil will probably want to pitch in on the economics factors. We found that unless we increased the weighting, then because basically the numbers that come out have been very normalised from a series of interviews, questionnaires, and kind of meetings, and all that sort of kind of qualitative research that's gone into that World Bank governance effectiveness process means that it was a very small number. So there would be something in the region of 0.09 weighting separating a lot of the countries in some areas, so we needed to increase the significance. And I know on the economic side, the sheer might of the American economy massively skewed everything. So we all looked, tiny in comparison, and then America was everything. So we needed to kind of weight everything so that no one factor could take control, as it were, of it and skew the ease of integration index.
That makes sense.
Answered my question for you. So the factor scaling was an important thing because the order of magnitude of America was causing us problems. So we've normalised them across the sample. So they're not. So as you can appreciate, technicality, the sample data was from a global pool of information. So we normalised to our sample, not to the globalised sample, because we didn't have we didn't list every single country and took an average. We could only take an average across the sample, which is and that's how the numbers have got themselves into context. Otherwise, as Henry said, basically America would have theirs, if it was a bar chart, America's would all be up here and everyone else would be like this, and it just would not be a useful comparison.
That makes complete sense. I think it is one of the great achievements of the report that you have managed to illustrate through diagrams, so effectively the data that you've covered. And it's really interesting to hear that that was one of the decisions you had to make in order to make that so transparent, in order to make this so legible to readership. So no, it's good to hear. Great.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of construction reports, I hope it sets a new standard for conveying information. I think many construction reports are very text heavy, have lots of summaries and which is good, but I think we gave ourselves a very strict sort of limits on how much space that we're going to have to make sure that we get across the things that are important and showing it in a graphical way, so it's easier to share. And when Henry and I presented this to the Scottish Government, it makes it far easier to present once you've already got it in a graphical form. There's no needing to translate it for people. It is what it is.
Yes, they could engage with it almost immediately, couldn't they? That was the best part, and I think taking the ease of integration process that we've developed, I think we can go further with this, and I really want to continue refining it, continue rolling it out to other countries, and perhaps revisiting some of the countries that we've done, or going into more detail into specific countries. And I think there's a lot of value in the index in for governments and organisations that are going into work in different continents. If they're expanding into new markets, they're going to need to know, exactly what is the state of play in these countries. So I'm really confident that the Ease of Integration Index is going to provide some intelligence to people in a really kind of easily digestible, presentable format.
Super. That's certainly something that is important to all of us at dotBuiltEnvironment, and I think that this report is a wonderful example of that really clear communication. I know Dan was wanting to be here today. He can't be with us this morning, but one of the things that he's very keen on as well is plain English language speaking, and managing to communicate effectively. And I think that that's one of the things that this report we've all tried to make sure that that does really well. I have one more question for you, and then I'd like to kind of wrap up by asking you about where this is going next. And whether you guys have any particular plans to work with others in disseminating this information, or perhaps in kind of producing a follow-up report, or what the SFT is going to be doing. The last questions I had, though, were moving into the comparisons of policy that you look at in the second part of the report, where you kind of take each of the countries again, and there's a slightly more qualitative piece of research into how each of the countries are engaging with industry, how each of the countries are featuring with innovation and research, for example, or their communication strategies. Could you explain to me, there's a large table in the book where you look at each of the countries and you kind of rate things as high, medium, low, there's a small amount of comments. Could you explain to me where that information was gathered from? Is that something that came about after some wide reading and a conversation between the two of you? It's more qualitative, and I just want to understand where that table's information has come from.
This is pure networking. This was, we know people in these countries, or we know people that work in the BIM policy areas of these countries. So a lot of this information came from our network. We had to do a lot of research. So there was a lot of just getting out there and talking to people, doing the research, looking online, checking the government websites and checking the various policies. So yeah, I think that's how that came about. But we did, as you say, have to make qualitative decisions about how we weighted specific kind of implementations of BIM. So we scored. For example, I'll do a couple of examples, Neil, then you do something. We scored the UK scope highly for BIM because we think that having a BIM policy that adds value to the whole project life cycle, the whole asset life cycle, means that it can impact in times when a lot of government spend is on maintenance, and it can impact when a lot of government spend is on investment and development. I'm just going to do one. Neil, you have a go.
I suppose the case studies and benefits realization. So there's a case study on doing, so for example, finding case studies of doing things in design that doesn't provide much in terms of beneficial feedback is sort of stage one. But if they've gone and done a cost exercise that included, people from a cost backgrounds, that's stage two. Many countries have done case studies. On our sample, everyone has done a case study and shown that they're doing something, but not many people took it as far as having sort of cost benefits and realizing positive or negative outcomes of implementing certain things.
I think we also, when we looked at, so I've discussed already, in terms of it having a wide scope in terms of what it covers. I think I'd add to that. So there is the, I suppose we took a view that centralizing is a better approach. I think that's an entirely relative decision based upon our perspective, that we think having a centralized decision-making process is the best way to implement a national policy. And with localism and with federal states, that is an argument that can go either way, and it is one of perspective. But we felt that in order to make it so that businesses that want to work within a given state, a given country, as it were, have a clear set of rules that they have to abide to, and they don't have to kind of relearn the rules every time they go. Every time they cross a county line or a state line, would make it easier for them to do business in those places. So, there is this, that's a qualitative decision, but I think we can stand by that in terms of having a unified approach is always better than a disparate one.
Thank you. No, it's good to hear a couple of those examples, and we can kind of extrapolate for that the other decisions you might have made. Just beginning to wrap up then, the last couple of pages, the last section of the report, just prior to the recommendations, you cover a much wider sphere than BIM. And in particular, you look at briefly at the circular economy as a paragraph on Industry 4.0. Digital Built Britain comes into there. Do you see all these as being an essential part of BIM implementation, or is this background context for what the report is generally looking at?
I think the intention is to widen the scope of BIM implementation. I think historically it's been quite closed in its focus, and there's lots of other initiatives out there. I'm not saying that BIM falls secondary to them, but they need to be considered and integrated in order to be successful. The building information modeling is about the collection and sharing of information to make better decisions, and we need to start thinking about G-Cloud, the thing from the government where we've got government cloud information that's open, and tying those things together, for example. This is a very quick example, but there's lots of them out there, and I think it's about widening people's view of the mechanics of these things, and hopefully, maybe inspiration is a bit of a strong word, but inspiring them to look at it differently, and not just think about, oh, we need to do this stuff. It's we need to do this stuff, and we need to do it effectively, and more focus on being effective than just ticking a box.
Excellent. Super. So as part of pushing that agenda, then I guess my last question is, where is this going now? I know that the two of you have had a couple of meetings with the Scottish Futures Trust. Towards the end of the report, you particularly cover one meeting where you were engaging with colleagues, again, from around the world, discussing with the SFT where their policy direction is next. What's happening with the content of this report? Are you aware of what the SFT are doing with it? And do you guys have any particular plans to produce more policy documents or to run any kind of follow-up to this piece?
I think I do need to shoot off, but I think that's Henry's bag anyway.
Okay, I'll take it.
I suppose before I go, a brief, this is the first step into something that's wider. I think the integration index is something that needs a home, it needs development, because I think it's a useful tool, as Henry said, for businesses wanting to go into other countries to widen their, to diversify their businesses. With the EU referendum, knowing the outcome of that, the internationalisation of our businesses is very important. So I think the development of the index on a wider scope is something that we need to work on, and also we invite the countries that we covered and the countries that we haven't covered a right to reply, and what have they done since, what research as things happened, and just continuing the development of the findings. Anyway, thank you for your time, everyone. And
okay.
Sorry to shoot off, but
no, at all. Thank you, Neil. Really valuable. Speak to you again soon.
Cheers. Bye now.
Henry, then, if I can run back to you on that one. Neil's just spoken about the potentially developing and honing the ease of integration index. Is there anything else from the report that you think you'd like to continue to work on, or I guess I'll ask you specifically about the report, but then open that question up to talking about dotBuiltEnvironment and dotBuiltEnvironment's engagement in policy, which I know is something that you're very keen on. But if we start with the report, if we start with particularly this piece of work for the Scottish Futures Trust, where is it going now?
So it's being used by the Scottish Futures Trust BIM group to develop their policy. So they are looking at how they are going to use BIM level 2, how they're going to set their targets, how they're going to manage rollout, how they're going to set up all of those mechanics that will enable their built environment sector to implement BIM level 2. I know that they are also interested in some of the kind of the digital innovation policy aspects of the things that we've looked at. So I think I know that they're looking into smart cities. They're looking into the Internet of Things and trying to understand how they can drive value in their built environment stock and their infrastructure rollout process. So that's what they're doing with that now. Internationally, so we have spoken with a couple of representatives from South America. We've spoken with the Europeans, because they're just them now, they're over there. We've spoken to their task group, and I think we are still, at the moment, ploughing ahead with the integration of BIM across our borders and using BIM level 2 as brand UK still going out there, but the various European states that we've spoken to have shown some interest in understanding, not just at the European level, but at their national level, where their policies could take them. Spoken to a couple of representatives in Australia who are looking, they're currently looking at a state-based approach potentially, but they are also examining an international, more national approach, and perhaps they'll be bringing in information, bringing in policies from somewhere else. So yeah, there's been a number of people, a number of states, number of kind of actors and players all showing an interest in this. So I'm very positive about where it's going now. So in terms of onto the other part of your question about the policy work of dotBuiltEnvironment, I think this was our proving ground to show that the dotBuiltEnvironment policy workstream does have some unique thoughts, a unique approach, and that can provide genuine intelligence and useful information and data to various actors around the world. So, I mean, we've worked with states. I think we need, as a stream, we've discussed how we need to make sure that not only that the policy from the government level is in place, but also that organisations are working towards the digital future, that they are working with universities, students, making sure that education is in place for people, so that we're attracting talent into our sector and we're keeping them, we're valuing them, so that we have the kind of built environment sector that we deserve, really, I think is what I want to see. And I know that you yourself are involved with education and various other aspects of the policy work stream, and through your other work. So I think that's something that we'll be really pushing. So going for governments, big organizations, small organizations, SMEs, educational institutes, and people, and seeing how we can shed some new light, maybe give our thinking and really push for digital integration, more innovation, and making sure that the skills are in place and that people are constantly learning throughout their lives. I think that's really what's important to us.
Superb. I guess just to put that in context a little bit within the wider scope of dotBuiltEnvironment, policy is one of 3 work streams that we work with. You've explained policy just there. We also have Innovate, which is more of a kind of active events-based organising, learning, training. Hackathons, for example, are something which have come out of that. We're also looking at training between higher education institutions and schools and lifelong learning. And then our final stream, which is essentially where everything is built around, is our network. And that's where we kind of share information with each other. We can put people in touch who might want to produce some work for policy or for Innovate. And also we just make sure that we maintain an effective interprofessional, cross-disciplinary network. At the moment, dotBuiltEnvironment is UK-based. That's something, though, that you can see just from what you've said, Henry, that policy-wise, we are looking globally. We're looking kind of beyond that. But it's an exciting organisation to be part of. And it's great to now see this coming out as you say, the kind of proving of policy, our first kind of large piece coming out. And it's interesting to have the feedback that we have had so far. I think that does cover the questions that I've received that people have asked from this report. It's been really, really helpful to hear from you all. We're hoping that we're going to have this up online in a format useful for everyone to get to as soon as possible. So I think that concludes what we said we were going to discuss today. Is there any final words that you have, Henry?
Yeah, I suppose I mean, we're all going to be big dotBuiltEnvironment fans, but that's because we are big dotBuiltEnvironment fans. I think I really would like to tell people that our doors are open. We are looking for people who are of a certain bent, who want to develop digital innovation, who want to learn, who want to share their knowledge, who want to better themselves and move forward. There are a lot of young professionals and early professionals who certainly in the BIM space, although obviously we're not just about that, in the digital space as well, who are trying to define their careers and are working in within a hierarchy that doesn't exist yet. So I personally have learned a lot about what is possible, where the future lies, and just what other people do. I mean, that's one of the great things about dotBuiltEnvironment, is that there are so many different people involved. We are such a wide church. There are so many different kind of worldviews, perspectives, experience, seniorities. People are graduates. We have people who are running their own businesses, and we have kind of literally everything in between, from SMEs through to education and large organizations. So I would just totally echo what you said about basically how awesome we are. Pat yourself on the back. We are. But I want people to come in and join us, because we all do. I know that. So we are open and we're inclusive. So
it's an exciting thing to be part of, and come on in, come and join us. If you run to our website at the moment, you'll see how to. There's a link at the bottom to ask you to email change@dotbuiltE.org, which will reach us all, and we'll get straight back to you. We discovered this report is kind of one of the first outputs from our policy stream. We'll be looking at showcasing various things happening within our Innovate stream at the Construction Industry Summit, which is mid to late September. And thank you to the CIC for giving us a kind of platform there to talk about what we're doing. And then finally, we'll be developing and presenting our network at Digital Construction Week in October of this year. So we have a busy few months ahead of us in terms of presenting dotBuiltEnvironment to the world. And we are looking forward to it. But thank you very much for today, Henry. That was really, really helpful. I'm glad Neil also could join us, and hopefully we have answered some of the questions on the Global BIM study.
Me too. Thanks, Alex. That was great emceeing.
Lovely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.